What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about the new installment into the DCEU, Black Adam. Directed by Jaume, Collet-Serra, and starring people like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in the titular role of Black Adam, as well as Aldis, Hodge, Brosnan, Sarah Shahi, Ahmed Amer, and many, many more. So Black Adam is finally upon us, and of course I know this is a brand new film. A lot of you guys are probably excited to check this movie out or hear my thoughts on it, and you don't have to worry, there will not be no spoilers here in this review, so no worries here. I will be talking a little bit about some of the basic premise of the film and some of the setup of what was going on here, but I will be staying away from any big spoilers. But I will start this off by saying that there is a very enticing mid-credit scene that you are going to want to stick around for, that I think is going to give you a big smile on your face, and definitely had my entire theater applauding as soon as it was over. So, how is this movie? I liked it. I had a lot of fun watching the new Black Adam film. I do have some criticisms on it, but for me, this was a just good time at the movies. This was a popcorn film in every single way that you can possibly define a popcorn film. It's got the big spectacle, it's got the action, it's got the humor, and overall, it was just an entertaining time. This isn't necessarily top tier when it comes to the writing department, in my opinion, but this is a movie that just overall was a good, fun comic book movie that in a lot of ways reminded me of some of the animated DC movies, which in a lot of times are the better movies that DC releases. A lot of times the DC animation world, it has some of the more action-filled fun stories that we want to kind of see from the comics brought to screen, and we a lot of times don't get that when it comes to the live action stuff. And in the case of Black Adam, this far more felt in line with the DC animation world in terms of it being a big action spectacle blockbuster that does have a story that it hones in on, but ultimately a lot of times is really about the action. Most of the story that plays out here is all done through action from the very start of the movie, outside of exposition heavy scenes and flashbacks that teach us more about Black Adam and how he came to be who he is. This movie in so many ways ultimately is an action movie at its core that has a story that plays out through that action. So yeah, this movie doesn't have a whole lot of downtime in the same way that we see with a lot of other comic book movies nowadays, where they spend a lot of time on character development and growth. This movie did have character development, but it was mostly honed in specifically on Black Adam himself, and I'm so happy to say that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was phenomenal in this film. Loved him. In a lot of ways, he's playing that cool Dwayne Johnson performance that we've seen before, but he has a darker edge to him here, and you can definitely tell that he was eating this performance up. He was having a blast playing this character, and you can 150% tell when you're watching this movie. Overall, I loved him in the role. I love the look of the film. There are some moments where the CGI is a little bit cartoony, but it is a big over-the-top, superhero spectacle. This is a movie that's heavy on spectacle, CGI, special effects. So, for a movie that, knows what it is and is going for this big, almost 300 style over-the-top action kind of movie, the CGI I think works with the tone. I've said that here on the channel before. For me, when it comes to CGI that's a little bit cartoony at times, as long as it is in line with the tone of the film, I'm all in. And so in the case of Black Adam, I think that even the cartoony CG at times, for me, was very much in line with the tone of the film, which was over the top, comic booky, in a lot of ways cartoony, while also being really dark and graphic at times. There's a lot of really great action and violence in here as well. There's some brutal kills from Black Adam himself, as well as some great action between him and some of the other super characters that we have over the course of the movie. And yeah, when it comes to the action element of this movie and just this movie as an action movie, I was 110% on board. I was having a blast from beginning to end. I love seeing The Rock in this role, and there were so many little Easter eggs, hints, and nods for longtime fans of the DC comics in this world, being able to see some of these things that are kind of being explored a little bit further. This is also a film that does start to connect more into the DCEU, which is nice to see, because it feels like they were kind of starting to sideline it for a little bit, and then some films are part of it and some films aren't. And in the case of Black Adam, this is definitely an attempt to start leaning back into the DCEU, which put a smile on my face, because for whatever mishaps they've had, I am invested in this universe, and it is something I want to see succeed. I would love to see it succeed to the same level that Marvel has. In a lot of ways, I feel like they've stepped on their own foot. There's been some creative differences, some studio interference, whatever the case may be. But in the case of this one, you can tell it was a passion project that just wanted to execute on fun. A cool story, something that you can grip onto and follow along with, but in a lot of ways, just fun, action, and over-the-top elements, and I think that this film really executed on that. Now, as far as the story, let's talk a little bit about the base premise. We have Black Adam, and the movie opens with a whole narration and flashback that shows us how he came to be, and then we jump to present day, and we're 5,000 years into the future, and he is not really understanding what's going on. He's been encased in this tomb for a long time. He's brought out and finds out that the place that he had been protecting for years has changed so much. It's under control of various tyrants over the course of time, and all the freedom that he fought for in the past before he was encased in this tomb kind of has just gone to shit, essentially. Everything in the world and his little city and his world and his people are all still not necessarily liberated. They're living under oppression, and he now has to kind of come back and figure out if he's going to be the hero of this world now, if he's going to be the hero of this place, his home from the past, even though it's not the world that he remembers anymore, or if he's just going to be a flat out villain and completely react emotionally and be an over the top bad guy. And for anybody who's not familiar with Black Adam, he is a bad guy from the comics. This is another film in the trend of taking a villain who has some anti-hero narratives from the comics and making a movie on them. So in the case of this movie, it is an anti-hero film similar to something like a Morbius or Venom. Not necessarily to say that this movie is of the same quality of those films in some ways, but just to say that it's a similar kind of premise where we have the main character being an iconic villain, most notably the villain of Shazam, also a villain to characters like Superman, which there's so many different things that they've done in the comic books with Black Adam, but specifically he's Shazam's villain more often than not. And yeah, so they take this character and kind of give him an anti-hero story here. And so yeah, we've learned a lot about him through these flashbacks, and then we jump to the future, 5,000 years into the future. He has to kind of start figuring out whether or not he's going to be a hero now, or if he's going to end up being a villain. Does he want to be the savior of the world, or does he want to be the destroyer of the world? Because ultimately he has ultimate power. Nobody can just take him down, and this movie really tackles that, I think, pretty well, because he is an overpowered character. He's a character that could decimate pretty much anybody who's in front of him, no matter their power level, or he's going to give them a really hard time. So watching this movie, it was really interesting to see how they kind of handled him having to kind of come to terms with that over the course of the film and kind of realize who he wants to be. And I think ultimately most of the character development and growth really went to his character. And beyond all that going on with his home and deciding whether or not he's going to be the good guy or the bad guy, the Justice Society shows up. You have Hawkman, you have Dr. Fate, you have Cyclone, and you have Atom Smasher, who show up because they hear that he's been resurrected, that he's returned. They know how powerful he is from the past based on some old text and different things that they have of the past, and now they're wary. Now they're worried that this guy who could literally decimate the planet is here, and they go over there to try and stop him. And then it becomes this huge thing where it's Black Adam versus the Justice Society, which was awesome. And so majority of this film is really just a fight between all of them, with story that is happening throughout it, and him trying to realize that he needs to kind of work with the people of his home, his town, even though it's not what he remembered it to be, to help liberate them. And so it's kind of this thing where the Justice Society is in the middle of all this, and then he's in the middle of all this. Overall, this is a good time. I think if you've seen the trailers, you can kind of see where this movie's going. It's in no way reinventing the wheel or doing anything that's breaking ground. This at its core is just a big over-the-top action movie with superheroes in the mix. And yeah, I would say my biggest gripes with this movie was the narrative side of things. As I mentioned before, and I praised a bunch, the action is phenomenal in this film, and I think that that's what kept me engaged and just had me hooked in as a fan of some of the DC animated stuff that's very action heavy, or just a fan of these characters and being able to watch a big action spectacle film with a bucket of popcorn in front of me and a soda and watching it on a Dolby screen. For me, this was just a perfect popcorn film in that way. However, I will say that my biggest negatives about this film, beyond some of the cartoony CGI that I mentioned before, would be that the narrative for me is a little bit hollow. There are a decent amount of characters throughout the course of the film that I feel aren't really given a whole lot to do, or are not really given a whole lot to do narratively in any way, shape, or form. There are moments in the film where it feels like they want me to feel more for a character, or there's something serious that happens in the story in terms of a character, you know, having stakes, and you just never really feel like you're super attached to all of the characters, not because they're not cool or they're not interesting, but simply because the film hasn't done enough with them narratively for you to be really honed in on them and impacted when certain serious things start to happen to certain characters over the course of the film. So without a doubt, I would say my biggest issues with this film come from the narrative side. There was a bit of a hollowness when it comes to the character growth and development across all characters. It feels like all of that really primarily went to the character of Black Adam, which does make sense, but it did at times make me think that certain characters were a bit nonsensical or unnecessary to have in the story. There wasn't anybody that I downright disliked, but specifically if I had to say the two that felt the most just unnecessary in the whole movie to me, I would have to say it was the character of Atom Smasher as well as the character of Cyclone. Those two, for me, in terms of the Justice Society's, involvement in this film, they were just kind of a lackluster part of the movie. They really didn't serve too much of a purpose outside of some really cool moments of action, which I will say, visually this film is awesome. So when they were a part of the action, I was all in. But in terms of the story and when it came to the Justice Society, I was far more involved in Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate, as well as Aldis Hodge as Hawkman. I thought the two of them were great. I really felt like they emulated the characters from the comics. But even with them, I do wish that we had dived a little bit deeper into their characters and expanded upon them a little bit more narratively. Overall, I think this is a fun comic book superhero movie with a lot of big over-the-top action, and if you go into it expecting that, I think you will enjoy yourself, as long as you know that the story is going to be pretty straightforward, a little bit tame in terms of other comic book movies. This isn't anything that's trying to reinvent the wheel, but it's different enough, and I found myself smiling throughout. I was engaged. There was a lot of good humor throughout the film as well, and yeah, again, this is just a good popcorn film. So I'm going to stop rambling now. Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. Leave your thoughts down below. Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Or were you a fan of the big over-the-top action like I was? Did you also kind of see the comparisons between this and something like 300 in terms of its actions? Whatever the case may be, leave some comments down below and let me know what you guys thought about this movie, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.